I started homebrewing over 20 years ago, and in that time, I've talked with thousands of other homebrewers from Bellingham, Washington, and Fresno, California, New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, Germany, folks from around the world who share a passion for beer and making it themselves. Another thing we all share, which can be painful for some to accept, is that we're not perfect. We all make mistakes from time to time. This is the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and I'm joined by contributor Andy Carter on this exBEERience episode to do something a little unique. We're going to be sharing some stories submitted by our amazing patrons about their greatest brewing blunders, which I'm sure you and I will both be able to relate with, Andy.
Any hobby you participate in, if it's not your job, your profession, where potentially your professional credibility is on the line or something, you're going to make mistakes. And it's better in actually both cases to be honest about your mistakes. I run a small research group or production research group, whatever you want to call it, at work. And I'd rather them over communicate their problems. And so blunders, get used to accepting that you're going to make mistakes. You're a human, and it's better to get them out in the open. And so everyone hopefully doesn't repeat your mistakes.
Yeah, we learn from our mistakes. There's a reason that's a common saying. And I have, personally believe that there's an element of humility that we can get out of, laughing at our mistakes and then also making sure not to make those mistakes again. Huge thanks to listener and patron Steve Fisher for this idea. I know we're not the first to do this, but I am looking forward to a little bit of schadenfreude while also giving a little more love to the folks who make this show possible. Our patrons, which, speaking of, if you're a fan of the show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support or some influence over what we do in the future, please consider becoming a patron yourself over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. I mentioned last week that we were thinking of integrating a sort of virtual brew day reward. That is definitely something we're still working on. But for the Q&A this month, June of 2025, Brülosophy's resident traditionalist, at least when it comes to lagers, and one of the best brewers I know, Jordan Folks, will be returning to the stage. In addition to his experience with Brülosophy, Jordan has a ton of experience competing and brewing in a variety of competitions from a range of styles, including hoppy IPA to tangy sours. To be a part of this session, just make your pledge of just $3 or more by Saturday, June 28th, 2025, as Jordan's going to be hanging out on Sunday, the 29th. All past sessions are stored on our private Patreon and YouTube pages, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. Again, that's patreon.com/Brülosophy. Another really easy way to help us out is by using the links found at Brülosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience won't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. Thanks so much to everybody who has made the effort to help us out in that way. And finally, if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we'd really appreciate that as well. Huge thanks to everybody who's already rated and reviewed the show. We read every single one of them. All right, feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their incredible all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240-volt systems, and I'm telling you, these things are legit, efficient, easy to use with a relatively small footprint. You will not be disappointed with one of these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run an amazing YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear or even just reasonably priced kettles and such, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer over at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to let them know Brülosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. Listener and patron Sean Carney from Galway, Ireland, wrote in with some feedback after listening to our episode where we shared our thoughts on Dry January. Sean said, I really enjoyed the Dry January episode. I did it a few years ago and found I slept much better overall, and I lost a few pounds in the process. I tried it this year, but ended up getting engaged to my girlfriend on January 16th, so needless to say, I only completed half a month this time. You mentioned how you've not been able to brew since moving houses, and I'm curious what the first beer you will brew will be. I love the podcast and can say that Patreon is totally worth it. Sean, thank you for the shout out on Patreon, and I will get to what beer I'll brew here in a second. But Andy, the Dry January, you were not the one who was on that episode with me. It was Steve Thanos. What are your thoughts, just briefly, about Dry January in general?
I mean, I encourage moderation in drinking all the time. I think it's something you can get looped into. But I will say, if you balance Dry January with going harder for the other 11 months, you're not really doing yourself a disservice, not a service. So if you need to moderate for 1 month and then keep it the same way, I'd rather just drink less overall. So yeah, great, but maybe not the most efficient way to get healthier.
Yeah, and I think you and I are more or less on the same page. If you recall what I said about dry January in that episode, it was basically that I don't personally feel, the need to participate because I've never felt that I've had much of an issue with drinking. I mean, over the last few years, I've pretty much kept my alcohol consumption to weekends and social events. However, I am currently going on my second week at this point of no alcohol. Not no alcohol. I had a couple beers last night. It was the first time, though, in 2 weeks. And that was motivated by a recent doctor's visit where we were focusing on an issue I've had my entire life with acid reflux. This new doctor, my original one retired, she proposed doing an experiment to isolate specific foods and such. And it was funny when she told me, she's like, so I want you to stop, no joke. She goes, I want you to completely cut out coffee, anything with alcohol, especially beer, her words, spicy food, all things that I love basically. And I looked at her with these eyes going, I run a beer and brewing business. That's going to be mostly impossible, but I will do my best to cut back even more than I already have. And she kind of gave me that eye roll thing. So, but the thing is, I haven't slept better because I don't feel like my drinking gets in the way of my normal life activities anyways. And so I think that's part of what contributes to my perspective on dry January is that I just don't really need it because I kind of do mostly dry months anyways, with drinking being wholly social and usually on the weekends. And that's not to say I don't tie one on occasionally, but I don't have an issue with that either because I don't do it that often. So just my opinion, but I appreciate where you're coming from, Sean, as well. If if by doing something like dry January or cutting out alcohol for specific periods of time improve some aspect of your life, I would, if that was me, I would probably try to integrate more of the elements of dry January into my regular life because those things are important. Sleep, functioning at work, how you are with your family and your friends and all of that. So I doubt Sean has a major issue. I can see for some people that, I've heard from a lot of people that sleep is a big benefit to cutting out alcohol. I'm lucky enough that it doesn't have any impact on me, or at least it hasn't so far. So, but I am going to Hawaii in about 4 days. And we're going with Timmy Tim and his family. And you better believe we're going to the island of Maui, and we will be going to Maui Brewing Company. We will be going to Monkey Pod and drinking their amazing Mai Tais. I'm not going to restrict myself, even if it means I get heartburn. So there you have it. Thank you for the feedback, Sean. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. Time for a quick break. When we return, we're going to be going over our patrons, as well as some of our own Brewing Blunder experiences.
Imagine you're a business owner relying on a dozen different software programs, each one disconnected, more expensive, and more complicated than the last. It can be incredibly stressful, right? Now, picture Odoo. Odoo brings all the tools your business needs into one simple platform. CRM, accounting, inventory, manufacturing, marketing, HR, and more. All seamlessly connected. Everything works together, giving you the peace of mind that your business is running smoothly from every angle. Odoo's open source applications are user-friendly and designed to scale with your business, saving you time and money. Say goodbye to juggling multiple platforms and hello to efficient, integrated management. Stop wasting resources on complicated systems and make the switch to Odoo today. Visit odoo.com, ODOO.com. and discover how Odoo can simplify and streamline your business operations. Odoo, modern management made simple.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today.
Are dry eye symptoms frequently interrupting your day? Keep dry eyes off your schedule with Refresh Reliever PF Extra Lubricant Eye Drops, offering an advanced formula to soothe and hydrate your eyes. With innovative hydrocell technology to lock in moisture and prevent further irritation, Refresh Reliever PF Extra gives you lasting relief. Equipped with a soft squeeze multi-dose bottle featuring a double lockout system that keeps drops sterile, so you can feel confident using it. Refresh has been delivering relief from dry eye symptoms for 35 years. It's a track record of success that has earned the trust of physicians and patients alike. You deserve relief from your dry eye symptoms, and your eyes deserve extra. Find Refresh online or in the eye drop section at all major retailers. FSA and HSA eligible.
We all know that designing recipes is really fun, and doing it well is so much easier with good software. We at Brülosophy recently made the switch to Brewfather, and honestly, y'all, we could not be happier. Brewfather utilizes the latest technology to bring you the most robust cloud-based recipe design software that can be accessed anywhere, on your phone, tablet, desktop, and even offline. It also works seamlessly with numerous third-party devices to make it easier to monitor every step of your brew. I know change can be difficult, but trust me when I say you need to go to brewfather.app today to try it out for yourself. That's brewfather.app.
While I'm sure some, likely a minority, of brewers out there would claim to have never made a single mistake and that their beer tastes like the manna from heaven, for most of us, that's so far from the truth. I've certainly got a trove of blunders in my personal brewing diary, though I can honestly say nothing that I view as being too horrible or beer, deleterious to my beer. Well, before we get into the stories of our patrons, let's humble ourselves a little bit, Andy, and share one of our notable brewing blunders.
So I was looking over my notes, and I remember what happened. I remember what occurred. I was trying to remember when. What occurred was a wort chiller completely, it didn't explode, but it started leaking. So the story goes, right before I started Brülosophy, I joined Brülosophy 2019. I had one of these very complicated wort chillers. One of these wort chillers that has a lot of copper surface area for quick chilling, and it's all tied together with soldered joints, right? And so I don't really roughhouse with my brewing equipment. I think I treat it pretty well. And I was brewing a big batch of just plain wort for a barrel project with my homebrew club. And it's late at night because I was after work. I'm like, I got to get this done. I got to get these things fermented and everything. And so get the beer all good, hit the pump to start chilling. And then I just hear tss, oh, no. And all of this hose water just starts going into the batch of beer. And I'm like, no, because it's already late. And I was like, I got to brew this and everything. So I went back through my notes. I can't remember if I stayed up all night to brew more beer, but I was very, it was sad. Maybe not needless to say, but because it was hose water, I just chalked it up, dumped it, give up. But yeah, I did lose a whole batch of beer. But anyways, I got a new wort chill after that, and it was all good. But yeah, kind of crappy.
Just a huge bummer blunder, man. Nobody wants hose water. You spend all this time trying to get your water good, and then hose water goes in there. Oh, what a pain in the butt. So I'm going to start with the very first brewing blunder that I could recall. This is all the way back in 2000. I think it was late summer of 2003, probably my third or fourth batch altogether. I was living up in Bellingham, Washington at the time, where temperatures are pretty perfect for fermenting beer throughout the year because it doesn't ever get that hot. Well, with autumn coming up, I had the idea to make a caramel apple amber ale, which I'd serve at a Halloween party that we were planning on attending. The brew day went off without a hitch. I mean, this was an extract with steeping grains batch, so it was pretty simple. Once the beer was fully fermented and ready to bottle, I decided to add the flavorings. And as you might have guessed, I wasn't going to use the actual, stuff that I wanted the flavor. I wasn't using real caramel. I wasn't using real apples. Rather, I poured something like 4 ounces each of caramel and apple extract into the bottling bucket before racking the beer from the carboy along with the priming sugar. So these were these little bottled extracts that I just found at the grocery store. And I thought, hey, they're food safe. They're intended for food. So it's going to work out perfectly in beer, and it'll have a nice pungent flavor that's more controlled. My mind was on that idea. Well, after waiting a month for the beers to properly carbonate, I popped the first bottle, and I was met with a flavor that I can only describe as toxic. It tasted like poison almost. It did not taste like this beautiful caramel apple that I had envisioned, but more like I'd imagine like a caramel apple perfume would taste, It was nasty. Well, the upside to this story is that I had a friend at the time who worked for the local cable company, and he was nowhere near as appalled at this disaster of a beer as I was, and he actually offered to hook me up with free cable. This was back in the days where they could put in, the reason you wouldn't get cable is because they put like a blocker between your coax out on the street. So he just went and removed that. I gave him, 46 bottles of this nasty beer. So I actually ended up making out. But I was thinking back, what was the very first mess up that I did? Because my first batch of Irish Red Ale was surprisingly good, much more so than I would have expected for a first batch. Well, did I learn my lesson? Of course not. What's truly pathetic is that I ended up making probably like 3 or 4 batches later. I thought, you know what, that was a one-off. I'm going to try this one more time, but I'm going to go with almond and coconut. I want to make an almond joy beer, which nowadays, coconut porters are relatively common and kind of have that. They're delicious, and most good ones that I've had are made with real coconut. Well, I didn't do that. I used this extract. And yet again, the beer was utterly awful. I was able to, it wasn't as bad as the caramel apple, but I was able to pawn those bottles off on friends. So we weren't dumping anything, but all right, let's get into some of our patrons' blunders. A little disclaimer, we ended up receiving way more stories than would fit in a single episode, so we did our best to randomly select those that we're going to be sharing today. Perhaps we'll get into others in the future. If you guys like this type of content, let us know, and we can keep doing these. We can kind of integrate them into our regular schedule. So we're going to start with the person who gave us the idea for this episode, Steve Fisher, who said, one time I made a delicious coconut-infused brown ale that I had made for a competition based on Kona Brewing's Cocoa Brown Ale. Good beer, by the way, and I will be in Maui in a few days. I will be drinking some of that stuff. So Steve says, after kegging it and taking a sample, I placed it on gas in my garage and went upstairs to make dinner for my family. A couple hours later, my wife came home and asked why the garage reeks of coconut and why the floor was wet. It seemed the fitting on the beverage post for the keg was a bit loose, and when I added CO2 for burst carbonation and walked away, all 5 gallons must have leaked out in mere minutes. And to add this is horrible. To add insult to injury, when the garage door opened, the liquid that had collected along the closed door began raining down on everything inside of it. Cocoa brown rain thankfully hid my tears as I enjoyed perhaps only an ounce of this tasty brew.
I think this is such like the most common story, or one of the more common stories I've heard, is the fittings. So like connections is always something I've tried to minimize in my brewing, or, have good standard operating procedures around like connections. So I think the first time I noticed a leak or something was probably a keg, probably, corny keg or something like that. And I just like kind of made it like a thing, like to examine all of the fittings and like listening. And star sand is a huge thing I loved because it would bubble. So when there'd be a little leak here or there. But yeah, this is, I think I've heard, I don't have a specific one. I remember like a carboy not exploding, but the top coming off.
Oh yeah.
That was like when I had PET carboys prior to like stainless steel buckets, and the airlock would get clogged and then pressurized, and then the whole thing would it would leave a stain on the roof of the the fermentation area, and it was very common. So yeah, pressure or bad fittings, such a common tale. Preventable, but you're always going to get a couple.
Well, and it's one of those things where I feel like when you get the leak is when you need to fix the leak. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard sometimes to know exactly what the issue is and what's causing a leak. I have a very similar story, Steve, so I feel your pain. I had made it was actually supposed to be an experiment beer, so I had 2 kegs of the same beer with one exception in terms of variables there, threw them into my keezer, hit them both with gas, and I just left them on serving pressure because I was going out of town for a week. You see where this is going.
Oh, yeah.
I come back and I open my key. I'm all excited to go and try these beers. They've been conditioning for a week. I go and I pull from the first one and it fills up my glass and it's great. All right, great. And I go to try the second one and it's just blowing CO2. And I thought that's impossible. So I open the lid to my keezer and there is at least 2 to 3 inches of beautiful beer sitting on the bottom of my keezer. Well, what I found out it was my the O-ring on the liquid outpost had just a tiny little crack in it. And that tiny little crack opened up just enough, allowed just enough beer to sneak out that over the course of however long, a few days, 100% of that keg
Ouch.
ended up in the bottom of my keezer. So I feel your pain, Steve. It sucks so bad. And by the way, talking about me moving into the new home, the garage, it was funny when we were moving out, we had the garage completely empty, and Tim looks up and he goes, "What is that stuff on the ceiling of the garage?" It was I had a PET carboy that it built up pressure, and I took the top off after a couple of days. I don't know why I bunged it the way I did, and boom, shot up to the ceiling. So yep, I've done it all. I've got all of these stories. So next blunder comes from Harrison Lenowski, who says, "I ruined an English barley wine by shielding it from the wind with a moving blanket, which worked great until a gust of wind blew it directly into my burner and the whole thing went up in flames. Yikes. I totally thought my deck would catch fire too, but it only burned the blanket, partially melted a ladder I used to suspend my brew bag, and ruined my brew day by getting pieces of burnt blanket into my wort." That's terrifying. Jeez.
Yeah, it's a fire. So yeah, I mean, I think right up there with like glass carboys, which we swear against, is since the advent of really high quality electric brewing systems, you can avoid these fire issues. Now, if you're trying to make a lot of beer and you don't have 220, then okay, you got to go to propane. And my old system was all propane, and so that's what it is. But yeah, windy brewing, recipe for disaster, unfortunately.
Terrifying. That was one of the reasons I really wanted. We don't have much wind here where I live, but one of the reasons I was really excited to go from propane to natural gas, besides not having to go fill propane tanks, was that I could do it right in my garage and not worry about it, no wind, nothing like that. But there was one morning that I went out, I used to wake up at like 4:00 in the morning to brew these dual, when I was building Brülosophy. And I get out there one day, and the way the natural gas would work is you'd turn the valve on, and then you had to take an aim of flame and put it under, and light it up. And I do that, and it did that nice little poof. And I didn't have eyelashes for 2 weeks, is all I'm going to say. That was all it got. I didn't burn anything else but my eyelashes.
There was a time with my old burner system, it's like one of these, not bayou burners, but one of these big burners, right? A nice one. And it wasn't light. Nothing was going on. Nothing was happening. I'm like, what's going on? And then you get really sensitive to the smell of gas, right? The sulfur that's in a gas. I'm like, oh, it's leaking. And so I had to disassemble the whole thing. It took a couple hours because basically shot my brew day. But I'm like, oh, this thing is like leaking in weird places. Turns out it was like the hose, that black hose that all the propane feeds from the tank to the burner nozzle. So that took me a while. But yeah, no, it's kind of it bothers me now that I think about it, how dangerous flammable or open flame brewing is. And so I'm really happy about electric brewing. It's another thing not to worry about.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, the fact that so many of us were brewing with these huge banjo burners in our garage or right outside the garage door. I guess it's still relatively safe so long as you practice good, you do it right.
Yeah.
But man, the stories that I've heard some other stories of stuff catching fire or kids getting burnt because they're running around or whatever. And I'm all about the electric nowadays, as it seems a lot of people are. So. All right, Andrew Brozak says, "After taking a few years off from brewing, I was itching to get back into it. This was back in 2021. My first batch finished at 10:24, which was pretty bad considering it only started at 10:43. I'd never had that happen to me, so I took to the internet and found some mixed reviews on the use of dark LME, that's liquid malt extract, which I used for this batch. So I blamed it on that and proceeded to try a different recipe, this time using a lighter LME. The OG was 1053 and the FG was 1025. Well, okay then, that didn't work. I was a little frustrated at this point and made the simplest beer you can make. The recipe consisted of light DME, whatever hops I had lying around, store-bought water, and Nottingham dry ale yeast. It still finished at around the 1025 mark. I gave up, putting all of my equipment away in a bitter defeat, convinced that maybe I'm just not very good at this. Fast forward to 2024, it'd been 3 years, and I decided to try again, but this time I was going to prepare myself with some fancy new all-grain brewing equipment and lots of research. Enter Brülosophy. I discovered this podcast and began listening religiously. It was during one of your Brew & A episodes that you and a contributor mentioned that refractometer readings are fine for determining your OG, but are unreliable for FG measurement due to the presence of alcohol. I stopped dead. I'd been using the refractometer for all of my gravity measurements. I rewound the podcast and listened again. The submitted question even mentioned that their beer had finished at around 1025 FG, just like mine. I couldn't believe it. I dumped the better part of 15 gallons of beer because I was convinced it was going to taste like unfermented wort. Needless to say, I bought a hydrometer and will always at least taste my beer before dumping it. Yeah,
your best gauge, even though it's qualitative in some ways, is your own palate. And I think that that's something people forget, is that your data is to guide, in my mind, in my opinion, their data is to guide your subjective opinion and what you want.
Yes.
We've covered this many times. I can taste diacetyl a mile away. Some people can't. Sulfur components, all these off flavors, even OG, FG, is really hard. It can be really hard and very in the person's mind. So let's just say you start brewing, and you're like, oh man, I really taste diacetyl. You're going to focus on fixing that, and maybe you're going to taste too much of it because you're now sensitive to it or something. But some of the people will be fine. And in this case, it's good that the data was driving their conclusions. Like, oh, I know there's a problem here, and then they fixed it. But in the end, tasting the beer, everything is about the taste of the beer, right? If you got obsessed with making sours but hated the taste of sours, why are you making it? It's your hobby,
Right.
It's your passion. Unless you made it for other people, right? There's a whole set of people. I know plenty of people that make beer for other people. They don't drink as much as they used to, and they're really making beer for other people. But yeah, you really got to focus on what does it taste like for you, and what do you want out of what you're making.
Yeah, and the whole refractometer thing, you are definitely not alone, Andrew. When I first got my first refractometer, I had the same issue. Now, I also had hydrometers on hand, and I'd never had issues with like poor fermentation. So I just tested the beer with a hydrometer and noticed, wow, it's way lower. And so I did some Googling immediately and found that you do not test FG with refractometers. I know there are like conversion calculators out there, but I never found them to be nearly as accurate, and it's easy enough just to take a hydrometer measurement. Something similar, though, I had a friend, local friend, Sean, I think I've told this story on the show before, who was, he's an incredible brewer, makes excellent beer. He was consistently making these beers that were not finishing out, and he's using a hydrometer, not finishing nearly as low as he had planned, which was new for him. He's usually very good at predicting his final gravities and such. And this was regardless of what the OG was. These things just were not fermenting or attenuating to the degree that he had hoped for. So it took about 3 or 4 months. Me and all of the friends were like trying to troubleshoot this. Well, come to find out, his thermometer was out of calibration. And so he had been mashing 10 degrees warmer or so. I think it was 11 degrees Fahrenheit. Ouch. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So like 3 or 4 degrees C warmer than he thought he was. So he'd throw his thermometer in there, and it would say, that he was at 150 Fahrenheit when he was really up at 160. And what do we know about mash temperature? You're going to produce a more dextrinous and thus less fermentable wort the warmer that mash temperature gets. And that's exactly what he was doing. But to your point, Andy, he didn't throw any of them out because the beer still tasted great. That was the weird thing. They just had less alcohol. And that was one of the things that kind of influenced my thinking on just mashing warmer. If you're looking to make a lower alcohol version of a beer, you just mash warmer and you're still going to get a lot of the same flavors out of that. It does not taste sweet. That is one of the few things I will say I've accepted as myth, is that higher FG means sweet. Not all the time. It really doesn't. So. All right. Rune Miller-Yord says, I ferment in a PET Firmzilla. A year ago, I brewed a Doppelbock, and after transferring it to my keg, I made the wise decision to not clean the fermenter straight away. It obviously wasn't done fermenting. It was now placed in a spot that was a bit warmer, and it was fully sealed. Uh-oh. Pressure built up, the trub collector exploded, and to this day, I find spots of trub in my winter garden where it was placed. This is kind of goes along with what I was talking about earlier in my garage.
Yeah. I did it once. Can't remember what it was. It's definitely one of the first apartments. No, it was a house I lived in. I was renting with friends, and I was setting up these kind of more DIY fermentation chambers. They had a fridge, a small fridge. They like made a box, surrounded the box with insulation. And I think it was one of these. It's always, there's very common things, right? You do it. You go on a trip. You come back, and something's gone wrong, right? So you're like, maybe the rule of thumb is don't go on a week-long trip after brewing a batch of beer or something like that. That's where the gremlins come into the system.
No joke.
I remember coming back, and I'm like, the PET carboys, you look at them straight on, and like they look pretty cylindrical and straight, and then when you see one that's been inflated a little bit, you really tell because everything's just a little more bulbous. And I remember popping that thing, the whole all of that gunk just comes and hits the ceiling. It's just so funny.
I already told one of my back pressure buildup stories. The other one, and this one really does make me laugh. Hopefully it makes others laugh. I just went out to purge a keg that I had been burst carbonating, and it was I think it might have been, I don't make these often, but I think it might have been like a Weiss beer. So you really want it highly carbonated, that's kind of traditional. And so I do my best to get as much beer into the keg as possible. And for whatever reason, because Weiss beer doesn't require very much hops, I was able to fill this keg up, and I thought I had left enough room above, between the gas tube and the actual, top of the beer line there to be safe. Well, I've got 60 PSI of pressure in this keg. And when I went to purge it, at this point, I was using just a flathead screwdriver. I depressed the little poppet in the middle of there, and I got a face full of beer because the tube was just right on had dipped into the surface of that beer, and it just erupted in my face, because I'm bending over the keezer, poking this thing in. And I just remember stopping, and I had to chuckle, and I went inside. And my wife starts laughing, and my kids are like, "What happened to you?" It was so much beer. Pressure will get the better of you sometimes, so just be careful with stuff like that. All right, final blunder for this segment. Lance Criswell says, I was going to do an overnight mash, which I'd done several times with great success. This time, I mashed in, put the lid on, and went into the house. I brew on a spike solo in the shop in my backyard. I must have hit the boil dial while I was getting it buttoned up, because when I got up the next morning and went out back, I could instantly smell the problem. It was completely burnt up. I fried the element and boiled dry. The GFCI tripped, so luckily it didn't catch on fire, but it did take a month to get the smell out and some serious scrubbing to clean the kettle and mash basket. Of course, I had to buy another element and replace the GFCI outlet, as it wouldn't hold anymore. Nowadays, I just try to stick to short and shoddy.
Yeah, I think there's another one. It's actually interesting. The trade-off between electric and propane is this. There's this flammable risk, open fire risk, but these things are still, they're watts are watts, right? You're not going to boil water without watts,
right?
And so this kind of thing. Honestly, this is not the first time I've heard this one. It's more rare because maybe just because the sampling bias. There's less electric brewers now. They are increasing. But yeah, the idea that if you just one false move on the GFCI or one false move on these heaters, because they dump so much heat so efficiently, because that's why they're designed that way, to dump thermal heat into things, that they just kind of go off on you really fast. And so luckily, it's good. The failure mode, the ground fault circuit interruption is working. So that's good. Yeah. Not the best way to test it, but it worked. But yeah, no, it's luckily, I think back in the day, correct me if I'm wrong, Marshall, but back in the day, some of these heating elements were much harder to come by. So if you lost one, it was just going to be like, I got to go like months and find one. But now it should be a little easier to get, and so replacing them is not as bad. But I remember back in the day, people that pioneered electric brewing, these elements were not easy to come by.
Yeah, I'll tell you, they really weren't. And we're lucky to have so many great manufacturers out there now of these all-in-one systems that most of them will also sell on the side just the elements that you need. So, but I have I don't really have a blunder that is similar to Lance's here. But I will say that when I made the jump from natural gas to electric, and I was very cognizant of never running it dry. I never wanted to burn up the element. There was one time when I was in living up in Bellingham. It was actually the same apartment where I started brewing at, and I went and I turned on our oven. My roommate and I were weird. We were actually just going to make a small turkey for fun for dinner one night, and so I go and I turned the oven to preheat it, and I start to smell like fire. But it was like electrical fire. And I open the oven, and the element is burning like like a snake almost, like just going down and burning. When I started brewing electric, the last thing I ever wanted was to see that. And so I made very sure never to run it without liquid in there, took all the precautions. And then it came time for me to make a Berliner Weiss. And I was really like, the way I want to do this is I've got this great kettle that can hold a precise temperature very well. I really want to use this to hold it at, 90 degrees or 95 degrees, whatever it was. But that means I'm going to have to leave it there for like 48 hours. And that means I'm sleeping while this thing is turned on. And it's full of beer, or I guess beer, you could call it at that point. But I'll tell you, those were some sleepless nights because I just kept worrying that something bad was going to happen. Thankfully, it didn't. I was able to make a pretty great Berliner Weiss, actually. But I feel your pain on some level, Lance, because of the fact that would, I mean, you want to be able to do these overnight mashes, but maybe, short and shoddy is a little bit better for you in that case. So, alrighty, we've got to take a short break. When we come back, more Brewing Blunders.
Are dry eye symptoms frequently interrupting your day? Keep dry eyes off your schedule with Refresh Reliever PF Extra Lubricant Eye Drops, offering an advanced formula to soothe and hydrate your eyes. With innovative hydrocell technology to lock in moisture and prevent further irritation, Refresh Reliever PF Extra gives you lasting relief. Equipped with a soft squeeze multi-dose bottle featuring a double lockout system that keeps drops sterile, so you can feel confident using it. Refresh has been delivering relief from dry eye symptoms for 35 years. It's a track record of success that has earned the trust of physicians and patients alike. You deserve relief from your dry eye symptoms, and your eyes deserve extra. Find Refresh online or in the eye drop section at all major retailers. FSA and HSA eligible.
Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the exGEERience Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brülosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the exGEERience Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every exGEERience comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exGEERience.com today.
Are dry eye symptoms frequently interrupting your day? Keep dry eyes off your schedule with Refresh Reliever PF Extra Lubricant Eye Drops, offering an advanced formula to soothe and hydrate your eyes. With innovative hydrocell technology to lock in moisture and prevent further irritation, Refresh Reliever PF Extra gives you lasting relief. Equipped with a soft squeeze multi-dose bottle featuring a double lockout system that keeps drops sterile, so you can feel confident using it. Refresh has been delivering relief from dry eye symptoms for 35 years. It's a track record of success that has earned the trust of physicians and patients alike. You deserve relief from your dry eye symptoms, and your eyes deserve extra. Find Refresh online or in the eye drop section at all major retailers. FSA and HSA eligible.
As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Well, as much as we might have laughed at some of the blunders that we've shared already, I can tell you with certainty that we're not laughing at these patrons, but with them, as we definitely share many of their experiences. I mean, what better way to deal with shame and disappointment than to have a laugh about it? Well, this next one is a doozy. It comes from Mark Rose, who says, if my wife were here, this one cracks me up, she would undoubtedly bring up the party pig disaster.
The best title. This is the best title of all of them. The party pig disaster is perfect.
I know, that could be a book or whatever.
Yeah.
Living at Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico, I looked for a way to avoid the bottling I hated with a passion. I found a new brewing product called a Party Pig, which was a horizontal PET keg that fit in a common fridge, using a bag inside the Party Pig to push out the bottle-conditioned beer. Easy, right? One day, I kegged a gallon of a batch in the Party Pig, let it carbonate with sugar, then laid the Party Pig in the fridge and pressurized the bag inside. Apparently, the front fixtures were not seated correctly, and the Party Pig erupted everywhere. To add insult to injury, the now Rocket Pig escaped the fridge after laying waste to it and shot around the kitchen and dining room. Beer was everywhere, including dripping from the ceiling. The cleanup was measured in days, not hours or minutes. 2 years later, when we were leaving base housing for the next assignment and the house was newly empty, we still found more party pig devastation to clean up. Needless to say, my wife banned the party pig from being used inside the house, and I resumed bottling. That sounds like a nightmare to me.
You think about, you make a new product, like I'm going to release something to find the product market fit, and you don't test the idea that your party pig pressurizable vessel could be a rocket in someone's house. It's quite amazing. I think this is just hands down the best story of the day. It's too good. It's like perfectly homebrewing. It really encapsulates homebrewing in just the best way.
I just can't imagine like going and opening the door of your fridge and this balloon full of beer it just starts whizzing around the room, spraying beer everywhere. My wife would have been pissed. I mean, she's like, "Are you kidding? Beer is not easy to clean up, you know.
It's everywhere."
My bigger question is, how have I never heard of a party pig? Are you familiar with this?
No. When I started homebrewing 2008, 2009, like I was looking online, like I was on the predecessor to Northern Brewer, like Midwest Homebrew Supplies or something like that, and this was a common like if you didn't want to do bottling, but you didn't want to buy a keg, this was like your intermediary, because it's like in my mind, and I could be remembering this wrong, you have to Google it, but it's basically like a large soda bottle.
Okay.
And you pressurize that and then serve out of that, and it fits in your fridge. And there was not the same thing, but some commercial beer vendors had that thing. So you could like carbonate in a large, like basically a large PET bottle, like not just 2 liters, like 4, maybe even 8 liters. And then that could go horizontal. It was almost like borrowing from like almost English cask ale kind of brewing in a weird kind of way. It is actually more like cask ale than it is like any other like version of brewing. But yeah. And then it would have taps and you go to town, and then just must have been like, because what you need for it to be a rocket, right? You need matter, you need momentum, right? You need mass coming out of it. So it must have been that it just had enough gas leakage to like really get going. But yeah, amazing.
Well, Kegland makes, I forget what they call them, but they make these kind of bigger looking, they're not 2 liter bottles, but they have a similar look that are wonderful. I know Will uses them all the time. Great for traveling, all that kind of stuff. But there's no bag inside of them. They're just using you're just using it just like you would a normal keg.
Yeah.
And apparently they're just easier for travel. I mean, you're familiar with those.
Yeah. So no, this is actually, it really makes me think of these kegs that, so if you're a brewer and I see this a lot in sour beer brewing, especially European brewers, is they don't do kegs because you ship them one way. That's expensive. They're these plastic bags. They're actually Mylar bags that you fill the beer in. Beer goes in carbonated, cold and carbonated, and then your CO2 line pushes the bag like a Capri Sun pushes the beer out. So your beer never touches, your gas line never touches the beer, so you don't induce more CO2 or entrain more CO2. So you're keeping the same carbonation, and the keg is one way. Sounds like there's a couple hybrids of these types of ideas that have been floating around, but it's just so funny.
I mean, I will say that I've never had, I didn't bottle for very long, maybe 15 batches, and I've never had a bottle bomb. That's
amazing. Nice.
Yeah, never had a bottle bomb. I've keg conditioned many times. I've never had any issues with that. So I feel somewhat fortunate in that piece of things, because I've just not, the messes that I've made have been contained, kind of like the story I told earlier about about the Vienna lager in the Keyser. It was all contained in my Keyser, which was a pain in the ass to clean, don't get me wrong. But it wasn't a party pig spraying beer everywhere around the room. That is a funny story, Mark. I'm sorry you had to deal with that, but thank you for sharing it with us.
Good one.
Yeah, good one. All right, Ricky Alexander says, in my early attempts at cold side oxidation or cold side oxygen control, I tried fermenting an NEIPA, also known as hazy IPA these days, in a keg. I trimmed my dip tube a bit, but not nearly enough. I couldn't get it to transfer, and after several attempts to clear the way by pushing CO2 through the dip tube, transferring 2 ounces of beer, then clogging again, I ended up racking it into another keg with a racking king. It was not ideal, but I understood the assignment, and we kicked the keg within 3 days. The beer was okay, and I learned an important lesson.
Yeah, it's just I think this is maybe the more common one I've had, and the more common people have, is that fermenting in a keg or trying to get matter out of a keg is such a pain. I've done all the tricks, all the little, here's and there's to do it. And it's just kind of gets stuck and you got to live with it. Yeah, no, I think this is the right move. You're going to have to rack it somehow, and racking with the right kind of filters and things is the best way to do it. But I think that is, fermenting in a keg is a really useful technique, especially I think for size-wise storage. But you always know you're going to lose some. That's why cutting the dip tube way too high is the only way. The only other thing I've seen, and maybe Marshall's play with this, I think you've played with this one, is the floating dip tube. That kind of helps you like play with the height, so it isn't sitting on the bottom. Yeah,
I had floating dip tubes. They weren't my cup of tea. Just another thing to clean and worry about having sanitized before you use it and all that. And I'm not making that much hazy IPA anyways, but they do work really well. I know Jordan uses them. I know I think Will might use the floating dip tubes, at least in certain scenarios, and that probably would have helped. Ricky, good on you for minding your cold side oxidation. First off, that's a big thing, especially when you're making hazy IPA. The irony in this one though is that in his attempt to restrict cold side oxygen exposure, he ended up having to rack it to another keg, and thus inviting in a little bit more oxygen than you normally would anyways. So that is a huge bummer. But I'm assuming at this point you've got your process down and things are good, and so that's good. I've again. My clogged dip tube story isn't actually with a keg. It's with a fermenter. This was back when I was using the very first iteration of the SS Brewtech brew buckets, and I made a hazy IPA. So this fits the bill. And there is a little arm, like a racking arm on the inside of the brew bucket. And based on the style of beer I'd be making, I would adjust where that's at, right? So where does it pull the beer from? And in this case, given I was going to highly dry hop the beer, I kind of pushed it up so that it was probably, at about 11 o'clock. So it was pretty high up, and I thought I was more than safe. Well, what direction do dry hops fall? They fall down. I didn't think about that ahead of time. So rather than me pulling Trub out first, all of the dry hop matter, all of the yeast that had come out of solution when I cold crashed, a good chunk of that fell into this tube, which isn't small. So it caught it pretty easily and clogged it like a rock. There was no way I was getting anything out. I had to back flush it with CO2. It ended up being a mess, really annoying. But I was lucky enough that I didn't oxidize it because I was able to do all of this while keeping the lid on and keeping oxygen out of it. But what a pain in the butt. Those types of clogs are one of the things that you just have to deal with when you're making these highly hoppy beers. It can be a pain in the ass. So. All right. Modern Beer Hunter says, I brew on a Grainfather G40, so I have a habit of getting the water going to strike temperature for an early morning start. I mean like 5 a.m. When I added the grain and mixed it up, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The grain basket. I'd forgotten to put it in the system, so I recovered by draining the already adjusted water, scooping out the grains, and starting over. That made my brew day a long one. That sounds so tediously annoying to me.
Painful. I mean, yeah, at least the cleaning, it's not too bad, and it's got some pumps so you can help kind of knock it down. But yeah, that's bad. It's always it's tough because you try to find and eliminate all sources of error, but things like that just are always going to happen. And luckily, if you have enough pots and pans, you can scoop it out, put it somewhere. You have to hold it. It's hot. It's painful. Really, it's actually the biggest part of a hot wort is or hot grain is just carrying it. It's just so hot.
Yeah,
it's got so much energy in it. It's going to burn your hands. Yeah.
Yeah. I was trying to think of something that I could relate to Modern Beer Hunter here with, and the only thing that came to my mind, I was making, that's actually a recipe that I've shared with our patrons called Rudzu Alus, which means rye beer in Latvian. And I had this whole plan. We were going to host an event at our house. This was probably 10 years ago now. We're going to host this event with my wife's family, who are all Latvian. And I thought, how cool to have a beer. that sort of pays homage to, their culture and that type of deal. And rye is very, very common, as it is in most of Eastern Europe over there. And so I designed this really nice rye pale ale. It was this, hybrid between American hops, but continental Pilsner malt and I believe that's what I used. And then a good chunk of rye malt. I went with, I believe it was 20, maybe 25% of this rye malt. Well, what do we know about rye malt? It doesn't have any grain husks. You already know where this is going. It has no husks, and it has a high beta glucan content, meaning that it'll create a more viscous wort. And some people will even go to the point of calling it kind of snotty. It can be that viscous. I was fine with all of that. I was confident in my system. At this point, I was using the batch sparge method, and this was back in the days where you'd go by like a toilet hose, the braided stainless steel toilet hose. You'd cap off one end, you'd remove the plastic inner lining, and so it was just the stainless, and you'd fit it onto a 70 quart cooler, and it had worked beautifully for me for hundreds of batches, and I just thought, you know what, this thing works so good, I have nothing to worry about. Well, lo and behold, I was doing a no sparge, full volume mash, and I got to the end of the 60-minute mash step, and I go and I open the drain, and it pours out, probably about a half a gallon, and I just noticed immediately the slowing of the trickle, and it got down to a drip. Nothing was coming out. And these were the days where I still thought if I go in and I mess with the mash while I'm trying to collect it, it's going to ruin the beer. Nowadays, I wouldn't have worried a bit about it. But I absolutely contemplated, like Modern Beer Hunter said, I absolutely contemplating just moving all of that out into another mash tun that I had with a false bottom that I think would more easily, I may have put like a brew bag in there. But instead, I grabbed I had a stainless spoon at the time, and I took it and I just kept scraping, kind of guessing where that braided hose was at, and I would scrape it. It took me an hour to collect, mind you, a normal collection of sweet wort on a batch sparge brew day for me, 10 minutes tops. I mean, it came out very fast. It took me over an hour to collect that wort just because it required me to scrape down the edges of that braided hose. I did collect it. The beer was absolutely phenomenally good, very well received. I was super happy with it to the point that I made it a few times after that, but I made sure to use a brew in a bag because I did not want to have to deal with that sort of clogging or inability to collect the sweet wort. Have you ever had any experiences like that?
Not as often, because I always had, whenever I did my first mash thing, actually, I avoided your specific case because I didn't ever find one of those toilet braid solutions. I had to go and get the real, like a bazooka screen.
Right.
And the only time I had a problem when I had a problem, I could scrape it. Right. So you could get your spoon down there and scrape it. But that started to wear it out to the point where it ripped off of the flange. Oh, no. And then it was, all bets are off then. And so that was painful. And then, the only time, I think there's like the switch from electric to from the mash tun, the Igloo mash tun to electric, was that because you're now pumping it, your pump restriction becomes the issue. And then I've had pumps seize on me in that regard because there's too much matter going through the system. Yeah. But then it's like a flow rate issue. There's like a lot of things going on there. So you trade off like one thing for the other. But it was never so bad off that I think maybe once I had to take all my grain out in all of my issues, take all the grain out, then and start over. But yeah, painful.
One of the beautiful things about brewing a bag is that it requires you to take all of the grain out. And in doing so, all of the sweet wort drips through the grain and into the kettle.
Yes.
It's just so nice for avoiding issues like this. I mean, what a pain in the butt. I was very happy to not have to have this issue anymore once I started using a brew bag. So
I think that's an important thing about as we read all through these blunders is that there's trade-offs between all techniques, and then you have to just pick the one that you like the failures the most, so to speak. So it's like if you enjoy some of these things, like there's enjoyment in these Schadenfreude is as Marshall said at the beginning. If you enjoy some of these, there's always trade-offs. So just remember that.
Yeah, and there are so many. I mean, I have just a whole trove of stories I could tell that didn't ruin the beer. I thought they might, kind of like with the Rudzualus. I was like, oh, this beer's going to taste bad. It's going to have tannins or whatever. And it was absolutely excellent. I'm not saying that to pat my back. I'm saying that to kind of, elucidate this idea that you can make beer is quite forgiving. I didn't add anything to it. There was nothing like that, but yeah. All right, this next blunder is the shortest one on the list, but I think you and I will probably both have stories to tell about it. Tom Sills just says, boil over, boil over, boil over. Did I say boil over?
Yeah, I've had my fair share of those, mostly from the propane side. I don't think I'll ever have a system. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe Marshall will definitely comment on having a higher wattage electric system. But man, there's just, especially at the beginning, like I think the most common phrase you get in any like introduction to homebrewing is like, don't stop watching your kettle. Because it's like so easy for it to happen, and because of the proteins, sugar content, like it's very liable to make that heat dome in your kettle, and that heat dome is going to be very positive feedback loop. I mean, that's why like firm cap and those products are so nice, is that I can just I don't have to worry as much. Now it's not a panacea, right? It's not going to work for every single thing, but those like techniques of anti-foam are really good and work well and don't seem to affect the downstream beer at all, because it kind of settles in the keg. Yeah. But yeah, so many boilovers.
Yeah, so I can say that I've not struggled too much with boilovers. Have I had a handful? Without a doubt. The one that comes to mind that bothered me the most, it's funny that you brought up, with electric, it seems more avoidable, because it was the first batch that I brewed on my very first 240 volt electric system. Mm-hmm. This system has a setting for manual and then automatic. And I'm a dude, I get it. I thought I read the instructions, but I clearly didn't read them, in depth. And so I kind of had those two mixed up. So automatic is what you would set it on if you wanted to set a temperature and have it hold it at that temperature. And then manual, I believe that's what it was, automatic and manual. You would set a percentage but I didn't realize that it was a percentage. I was like, why does it have such a low number? I don't want it that cold. So I just cranked it up to 100. Well, that was way too strong for this batch. And I turned my back for a second, and I swear 3 to 4 gallons of hot break just spilled over the side, making a huge mess in my garage. Absolutely pain in the butt to clean up. Again, I can laugh at it now, but that day I was not laughing. The beer turned out fine. It was just the mess that I had to clean up that really bothered me. Then, but it also, like we were talking about earlier, you'll learn from your mistakes. Well, I went back and I thoroughly read the instructions and realized my error with the temperature thing, and learned that if I boil at 68%, I get a nice strong boil. I still have to watch it for boilovers. So you can imagine what, an additional 32% of power on a 240 volt system for a 5-gallon batch was doing. It was pretty gnarly. And then I'm sitting there with like a fan in my hand the entire boil, trying to make sure it doesn't boil over again. Of course, I didn't, learn my lesson during the brew day. It took many messes for me to figure that out first. But boil over sucks so bad. Probably of all of the mistakes you can make, barring, hitting your valve during the middle of a brew day. It's one of the messiest things. Such a pain in the butt.
Especially when it's like hit a burner or something that's just like open flame. That's where those combos really, really get you.
Oh, yeah. There's caramel, instant caramel, right? Yeah. Oh, gross. All right. Final brewing blunder for this episode comes from C. Barnes Brew, who says, my buddy Chuck and I got together at his place to brew one of our favorite styles, a crisp, malty Vienna lager. Yum, yum. Everything was going swimmingly. We mashed in, hit our pre-boil gravity, and wrapped up the boil right on target. His wife was kind enough to make us lunch, so while the wort chilled, we figured we had time to eat. What could go wrong? Well, everything. We come back to the garage, ready to finish up. The wort had chilled to pitching temp, and the final step was to check the post-boil gravity. We dropped the hydrometer in and froze. It was lower than our pre-boil gravity. Not just a little off, way off. That didn't make sense. Boiling reduces volume and raises gravity, not the other way around. Maybe the hydrometer was off. Maybe we misread it. Then we saw it. a thin stream of water leaking from one of the chiller's connections. It hit us all at once. The chiller had been circulating cold water and dumping it straight into our wort. The volume in the kettle had nearly doubled. That's crazy. Aside from the massive dilution, there was now a risk of contamination from untreated water and gunk inside the chiller. Boiling it again wouldn't save it. The batch was shot, so with heavy hearts, we dumped the whole thing in the yard. Then came the final insult, cleaning up after brewing a batch that never got to be beer. This sounds similar to the blunder you shared earlier.
Yeah, no, it's funny. That is actually so. Not even planned that one. That's so funny. But yeah, no, you got to check your connections, and it's at kind of like whenever you're applying a pressure, like a pressure change or some type of phase change, like be really mindful, like looking at all the stuff. You can tighten every bolt, you can look at every screw, you can look at everything, but it's but you can only limit these things from happening. Something will always occur. Murphy's Law is referenced here somewhere. But yeah, no, that's something I've always I've always heard of it happening, but this is the most extreme case of it because that's a lot of water. I mean, you're going to chill with, roughly speaking, I don't know if the rough order of magnitude is like something like 2 to 3 times your wort volume you need in water running, depending on cooling rates and things like that. So it does make sense. Like more than half of his volume is coming up with the water. That's terrible.
That is a huge bummer to have to pour out a batch of wort that you spent 2 to 3 hours producing. And then have to clean up after that. Oh, what a pain. My closest story to this, I've had a few instances where like the O-ring that between the immersion chiller, connections and the hoses were loose, and I would notice it like within seconds of chilling the wort and turning on the water, and I would just fix it, or I'd dangle that part of the, I always try to do that anyways, is that part of the chiller, I dangle it over the edge of the kettle so that even if it does leak, it's dripping on the ground and not into my kettle. Just a little thing that I've learned because of my fear of something like this happening. But I do have a story that I'll wrap up with that's sort of the opposite. I was also making a Vienna lager. It was a 10-gallon batch of Vienna lager. I feel like I might have told this story before, so apologies if it's redundant. But my friends all came over. I was just finishing up the mash. It's probably like 11 o'clock in the morning, and a big group of my homebrewing buddies came over. Of course, they brought beers with them, and we're sitting there. I get the boil started, and my wife calls us in to, hey, I got some snacks out for you guys if you want to come inside and eat. So we go inside, and there was a funny show on, so we sit down, and we're drinking these beers, and we're eating, and I look down at my watch, and 2 hours had gone by. Now, this was intended to be a 60-minute, a 60-minute boil. So I go out and I look, and I'm like a gallon and a half lower than for my volume than where I should have been. Clearly, more had evaporated. I take a hydrometer sample, it's a refractometer sample actually, and yep, I was way above the OG. But I am not a dumper. If I was C. Barnes Brew, I probably would have just cranked up the heat and let that boil back down, maybe add in another 5-minute hop addition just to get some of that flavor and aroma, and at least see where it would turn out once you boiled off all that additional water. Because I just hate wasting wort/beer. So in my case, what I did is I added filtered water, and I just was using filtered tap water. I added it to the point where my pre-boil volume was supposed to be, and sure enough, it got me right back to where that pre-boil volume was. I was worried about bitterness. I was worried about not good hop flavor or aroma. The beer turned out great, and I don't know how many stories I have that are like this, where I had this blunder, and I presumed the beer probably wasn't going to be good. But even when all those buddies came over to try it a couple weeks later, they were impressed with the fact that we were able to fix, this beer that was overly boiled, and actually diluted intentionally to hit the intended OG. So that was my final blunder story. Did you have any more before we wrap things up, Andy?
No, I think this is just good feedback, is to look at these and, like I said at the beginning, don't fear your mistakes. This is how you learn. This is your hobby. This is, your time to have fun. It is painful. And we can only tell you 100% of these you'll reflect back on fondly. And hopefully very few of these, I think you will still have a regret. It's a learning process. They're not even blunders that we come up here. These are, I think the funny thing here is these stories are there's a dynamic nature to them, right? These are, this exploded or this boiled over or something like that. But, a lot of my blunders in my homebrew experience have been like, miscalculations or
Yeah.
things like that, where they're a little more subtle, right? Or like misinterpretations of someone's recommendation, and those are smaller, but you learn from them. In the end, just keep on going. I think the best part is keep on going, and then always get a second opinion. Yeah, I think there's this idea that I got to dump it, I don't like it. Let's see what else someone else thinks. So find a trusted partner in your brewing homebrew career, a club member or a good friend that can give you honest feedback. And I think you're going to find out that what you think is wrong is much smaller, much less of a problem than you think it is.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that was the point that I was trying to make throughout the episode, is that of all of my blunders, the beers typically still turned out quite well. So, don't before you toss it, think about ways to fix it. And honestly, there's some fun in that too. You get to use your kind of creative gene there a little bit and come up with some way to try to get a drinkable beer out of it. So what surprises me is that we didn't hear any stories about bumped valves or broken carboys.
Yeah.
Both of which I've experienced, and perhaps that's just a sign of the times that people, aren't making the same mistakes we were back 10, 15 years ago. Anyway, humongous thanks to all of the patrons who allowed us to share their brewing blunders on this episode, as well as for their amazing support. We wouldn't be here without you. Don't forget to check out our YouTube channel, The Brülosophy Show, where host Martin Keene covers a bunch of fascinating topics in the world of brewing and beer. And remember to head over to brülosophy.com to stay current on everything we are up to. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no